Hello everybody, welcome back for another video, and today I'm going to be talking about the Great Stink of London that occurred in 1858. And before I get into it though, I want to walk you through my investigation and how it's progressed and what led me to looking into this Great Stink of London. So I'm going to actually, we'll get back to this, but I want to start by talking about this hotel. And in a previous video, I talked about this Ponce de Leon hotel. And one of the weird things about it, and I'll just blow this up for you. One of the weird things about this hotel, and it had the strange aerials on top of it. It had this interesting looking thing here, and these what we would call flagpoles. But what interested me about this particular hotel was that it had 504 rooms, but none of them had bathrooms. Only one of them had a bathroom. And it was supposed to be a 5-star resort, but you had this lack of bathrooms, and there was no real definitive construction photos for this building, and its origin is questionable. So this whole lack of bathrooms was a big concern for me, and it just stuck with me. So I remember when, just looking into that, I thought that was extremely strange. So that led me to start looking into the lack of toilets at the Palace of Versailles. And there's this nice little blog, and there's an entry here, and it just says that the splendid palace became known as one of the filthiest in the world. And there's a line down here that caught my attention, and it just says, it seems strange that iron pipes could be dug to provide water for the fountains in the gardens, but not to carry away waste. So there was no consideration for carrying waste away. Now, why is that? Why does that stand out? Because if you look at, the Roman culture, I'm not sure Rome, as it's described to us, is actually legitimately authentic, but the actual structures that they built are still around, and we can look at them. And they actually had proper sewer systems. They had latrines, and I guess one of the best preserved feature is this Housestead's Roman fort, and this is on Hadrian's Wall, and that obviously is in England. So, and the soldiers would sit on these boards with holes in them, which covered a big trench, and water ran in a big ditch at the soldiers' feet. So the Romans actually addressed, or at least attempted to address, this situation with sanitation. And this is just another website talking about the brief history of toilets, but here they mention, of course, that the Romans built sewer systems to carry waste into streams and rivers. And again, they'd sit down here, and there'd be a trench there, and water would take the waste away. So there are attempts by the Romans to, and examples of the Romans dealing with sanitation. But in Versailles, there was no attempts to get rid of the water, to get rid of the waste. So I decided to look a bit more deeply into Versailles, and there's this nice little 5-minute history, the grandest palace of them all, talking about Versailles. And when you start looking at it, today it still covers 2,000 acres, twice the size of Central Park in New York. And when I first looked at Versailles, I didn't really go into the looking at the gardens and the fountains, not realizing the true scope of this. And when you take a look, this is, I think, called the Grand Canal, and this is, I believe it's a mile, almost a mile long, and you have all these pools, fountains, there's gardens here, and if you just look at this place, it is unbelievable. The gardens of Versailles. We're talking high levels of engineering, yet they can't even match what the Romans did, a previous culture that was in Europe. There are examples of the technology they used, but yeah, they couldn't figure it out, or they didn't want to implement these simple strategies for sewage. At almost a mile long, the Grand Canal appears to vanish into the distance. I mean, the level of engineering and design and thought that went into this, and they didn't consider sanitation. There's just something tremendously wrong with that picture. Built in the shape of a cross, the Grand Canal runs east to west. This east to west orientation was no coincidence. It meant that the sun would rise and set in alignment with the palace. So again, massive consideration being taken with the design of all of this related to the Palace of Versailles, except for the sanitation. And just some more pictures. Like, I didn't realize how magnificent this place really was. So now I'm really starting, the thoughts that are going through my mind, this kind of contrast between what I'm seeing, the level of engineering, and the lack of solutions of sanitation at the Palace of Versailles. And it just doesn't make sense. They didn't, and I mean, there's all this engineering to bring water to the palace that I'm going to get into here, which even makes the contrast even more ridiculous. But yeah, so this is going to go into it a little bit here. So King Louis XIV couldn't get enough water pumped to the gardens to run 1,400 fountains simultaneously. So they brought in this architect, and he had skills of mechanical engineering, chemistry, or so we're told. So this architect created a network of reservoirs and canals stretching 18.5 miles outside the chateau. A massive pumping station thought to be the eighth wonder of the world. It brought water from the Seine River. So they built this massive machine that was a distance from the palace to pump water to give all these, to provide these fountains with water. And it was considered the eighth wonder of the world. There was issues, and but when you take a look at these fountains, so the people that are engineering all this, they brought water to these fountains, but they didn't want to bring it to the actual palace itself. It just doesn't, it's such a contrast. It just doesn't fit. And these are just, this is the Apollo fountain. And there's another one. I can't do that translation. But, and again, another one. And it's just amazing. It is unbelievable. Scattered throughout the gardens are over 300 statues and sculptures as well. So just the scope of this, sea monsters and the sculpture in the Garden of Versailles. So, yeah, it's just really impressive stuff. So I want to take a look at this machine, La Machine de Marly, the Marly machine. So let's learn a little bit about this machine, considered the eighth wonder of the world, that brought all the water to the Palace of Versailles. Not the palace, but the fountains in the gardens. So the machine of Marly, it was a civil engineering marvel located at the bottom of this hill, which I can't pronounce, on the banks of the Seine River. And Louis XIV, he had it constructed to pump water from the river to his Chateau of Versailles and the Chateau Marly. So there's another place, and we're going to take a look at that place. The construction of this machine lasted 7 years, and it was considered a wonder of the world at the time, and may have been the largest system of integrated machinery ever assembled. Okay, 7 years, largest system of integrated machinery, eighth wonder of the world, or considered a wonder of the world, but no one's even considering the issue of sanitation and waste. And I'm going to keep repeating it, bear with me, but it's just mind-blowing. So there were 14 paddle wheels. They were turned by the river Seine itself. More than 250 pumps forcing river water up a series of pipes to an aqueduct. A 500-foot vertical rise, so it was bringing water not only a great distance, but 500 feet vertical rise as well. And it was eventually gotten rid of, replaced, updated, rebuilt. So this place, there's some sketchings and drawings of it, but yeah, it was an impressive thing. And I guess I can blow this up. And this was all powered by the River Seine. There were no steam engines powering this or anything like that. So it's a marvel of engineering. And what I wanted to show you, so there was this other, this machine was providing water to the Palace of Versailles, and there's a Palace Marly here, the Chateau of Marly, and it's got its own pools. And before I show you these pictures, let's look at the estate of Marly. So it lies 7 kilometers northwest of Versailles. The king used it as a residence for leisure and kept access to it restricted to only a few privileged people. The Palace of Marly was gradually, demolished in the early 19th century. Demolished. And this is an image, obviously not a real photo, but another Grand Canal, pools, water fountains, buildings. This is all gone. This is all gone. And there's a little story here, but before they talk about its destruction, a little bit about the chateau itself. Because of its proximity to the Seine, reservoirs and water jets could be installed in Marly using the famous colossal machine built on the river, which was a masterpiece of hydraulic engineering. Okay, so now do you see why this notion that, people's hygiene was different back in the 1700s, how ridiculous it is, considering they built this machine, they had all this architecture, engineering knowledge, and they had examples from the Roman culture of how to get rid of waste simply, but they didn't do it. They didn't do it. The plentiful supply of water enabled the king to create waterfalls in Marly, which he had not been able to do at Versailles. So they weren't able to create the waterfall effect, but they had plenty of fountains in Versailles. So let me close that out. Okay, so getting back to La Machine de Marly, just reading a bit more about it. The original Louis XIV machine included not just an enormous structure on the river, but it sprawled 600 meters all the way up the hill, and that comprising pumping stations, holding tanks, reservoirs, pipes, and an intricate system of mechanical linkages to power pumps on the hill from the water wheels below. And nothing, oh yeah, of course, nothing of the original machine system has survived except for the aqueduct. Let's take a look at the aqueduct. Yeah, so I mean, just all of this engineering just to bring water to those fountains. But not concerned about the actual palace, either of these palaces or chateaus. So, yeah, looking back here. Yeah, so what else I wanted to show you is this is the computer model overlay of the site today. And this is where the machine would have been. Of course, it's not around anymore, but this is the exact location. But the reservoir, they're still around, but the mechanism is more or less gone. So that's a shame. But what I also wanted to show you was the fountains of Versailles in the time of Louis XIV, and this is pretty wild. And there's a part 1 and a part 2. But you could just, if this is indeed, if these are indeed honest representations, then we're talking about magical stuff. This is almost shaped like a little amphitheater. Yeah, I believe this one still exists. And I think this one still exists too. So you can just, the levels of engineering, I can't, I'm blown away by it. I definitely want to visit this place in the future. And there's a part 2. And you can just see, we're not talking about simpletons here. We're talking about people with high levels of knowledge. And I don't think we built this. I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but I believe that this was a pre-cataclysmic culture, and all of this stuff they went through the cataclysm, and the exact date of that I'm not sure, but I would speculate 1700s, late 1600s, early 1700s, but at the end of the day I'm not sure. But things have changed. So I just wanted to point all this out, because this idea again that people were just defecating and urinating on the grounds, and the best solution were chamber pots and commodes. It's ridiculous. Okay, so that takes us, let's close that out. Now I'm up at this point. I'm not believing this is an accident, that the people, this prior culture who built all this stuff, for some reason, sanitation, it just wasn't an issue, and I don't know why. But then I came across this, the Great Stink of London, because I didn't know about this. So we're going to take a look and learn a little bit about this. For decades, Londoners had been dying of waterborne diseases because the sewage contaminated the water supply. By the summer of 1858, the smell from the river was so bad, they called it the Great Stink. And that's interesting drawings there, or depictions. So by the summer of 1858, the Great Stink had become intolerable. I guess London was experiencing a heat wave, and temperatures in the sun were really hot, as hot as the Arizona desert. That's pretty hot. There's a picture of Queen Victoria with a clothes peg on her nose. Okay. Okay, so cholera, dirty water basically. That was people during the 1800s were dying from this left and right. Between 1831 and 1866, approximately 40,000 people died from cholera in London alone. The final epidemic killed 5,500 people in 1866 and that was restricted to the East End of London. This was an area that had not yet been connected to the new sewer system, which we're going to talk about. But this is pretty depressing. During the 1830s, infant mortality rate was 50%. It was hit or miss back then. And Victorians had no known cure for cholera, and they didn't understand how it was spread. There was a misguided idea that the cholera spread through air via bad smells, and they called this the miasma theory. And even after it was proven in 1891 that cholera was a product of the water contaminated, not the air, I guess Florence Nightingale, she remained a firm believer in the miasma theory until her death. Okay, so now this is what I want to get into. This really caught my attention. The flushing toilet was a major contributor to the Great Stink. In 1846, Parliament passed the Nuisance Removal and Disease Prevention Act, also known as the Cholera Bill. So its purpose was to encourage property owners to clean their dwellings and connect them to sewers. So there's two types of sewers. Storm drainage sewers to deal with water overflow, and sanitation sewers. I just wanted to make that clear. So all London had at this time were storm drainage sewers. That's all they had. These sewers weren't designed to deal with sanitation. But this act, so people were dumping all of their sewage into the Thames River, or on the streets, or they were creating these cesspits. There's estimates that there was like 200,000 cesspits in the city. So there was an act passed which said, connect to these sewers and just dump everything in there. And that actually made the problem worse. So there is this little video, and it's 10 seconds long. History of Sewage, the Great Stink of 58. And we're just going to listen to like 15 seconds of this. But he talks about this bill. And just listen here.
In fact, attempts to improve sanitation made the problem worse. The 1846 Nuisances Removal and Disease Prevention Act had forced the filling in and closure of old cesspits and the joining of house waste systems to the sewers. While this was supposed to remove waste from the city, what it actually did was dump untreated human waste down sewers originally intended for storm drainage.
Did you hear that? He said sewers initially intended for storm drainage. So they were not intended for sanitation, actual raw sewage. They weren't intended for that. So the actual, I think we walked back into London, into all the major cities. I think we got reintroduced. The cities that survived the cataclysms, there was a sparse amount of people between 1700 and 1850, and I don't think we built them, and we just started getting reintroduced to the cities. And as we got bigger and bigger numbers, all of a sudden sanitation is an issue. But the original people who designed London, they didn't factor in sanitation and waste management. They didn't factor it in. So going back to here, yeah, so they're just saying that the flushing toilets actually made the problem worse. The policy resulted in even more sewage being discharged into the Thames River. So rather than creating a sweeter smelling city, it caused the great stink. Despite warnings, nothing was done until the great stink. So along comes this person who has like arguably one of the best last names ever, Joseph Bazalgette. He is a civil engineer, and he comes around and he constructs 82 miles of main sewers, 1,100 miles of street sewers, 4 pumping stations, 2 treatment works, and 3 embankments. Yeah, so over the next 16 years, Bazalgette constructs 82 miles of main intercepting sewers and 1,100 miles of street sewers. So again, whoever designed London, they didn't factor in waste management, and that's a big problem. That is a big problem because I don't think they were concerned with it. It wasn't an issue. And when you start thinking of these cities as remnants of a prior civilization, this makes more sense to me anyway. So the system was opened in 1865, although it wasn't actually completed for another 10 years. And it took 318 million bricks and 880,000 cubic yards of concrete. Portland cement in its modern form is used throughout the world. Okay. So there's some pictures or some images of it, of them building it. And let's get rid of that. So here's the pumping stations. And yeah, the Bazalgette, his embankments, they had as much of an impact on beautifying London as Sir Christopher Wren's rebuilding after the Great Fire of 1666. So these embankments are actually pretty impressive. And yeah, so when I came across this, it just reinforced to me that whoever really built these cities, London in particular in this case, they weren't concerned with waste management. And I know the official narrative will say that, oh, well, they just didn't plan on so many people. So looking at London, the situation in London with the Great Stink and how they had storm drainage sewers, but they didn't have sanitation sewers, I wondered if that was the case in other major cities, and I decided to look in St. Petersburg in Russia. And I found this paper that was done on the development of water supply and sewer systems in St. Petersburg. And what I found was more of the same. The first studies concerning directly the removal of municipal waste were not even published until 1874. The first studies weren't even weren't done until 1874. No analysis of the water supply in relation to wastewater disposal had been undertaken. And then I found a document talking about St. Petersburg's wastewater collection system history. And it's not until the years, in the year 1893 and 1894, this contractor, W.C. Porter, he built St. Petersburg's first sanitary sewer system. So prior to 1893, St. Petersburg didn't have sanitary sewers. They had storm drainage sewers. So the people, whoever built St. Petersburg, didn't factor in waste management either. And why is that? Why am I concerned about that? Is because St. Petersburg is known as the Venice of the North. It has that nickname. And there's this one canal called the uh, Kryukov Canal, and its lack of recognition is a shame, according to this article. And I just wanted to show you some pictures of this canal. And it has these concrete embankments. There's a bell tower, nice little church, building with interesting windows. One of the main attractions of this canal is a man-made island called New Holland. But look at these embankments. Just that alone, the engineering of that alone is very impressive. And just showing you some more pictures. In the wintertime, there's ice, there's that bell tower church. Again, this embankment, impressive. And, you've got this Venice-like effect going on. St. Petersburg is another one of these cities that survived the cataclysm. People just moved back into them. We have this fake history. Peter the Great supposedly built it all and based it off of, European style, other European cities. It's just all a lie. But I just wanted to point out this canal and all of the engineering that had to go. All of the level of engineering, it's at such a level that the thought that this civilization, the thought that they forgot or didn't know how to deal with sanitation, it's ridiculous. It's even more ridiculous than the Palace of Versailles situation, in my opinion. But they're both equally ridiculous. So that's why I think there's something else going on. The people that came before us, before the cataclysm, they didn't have to factor in waste management. So, that is interesting. And just a side note here is there are these photos, right, from 1861, I believe, and the streets of St. Petersburg are completely empty. And what I kind of find interesting about this is, there's just some boats, but there's nobody. It's lifeless, right? And this has been talked about by other people as well. What I find interesting about this is it's not till after this that St. Petersburg experienced issues with waste management. So 1861, those photos, so it's not until later, 1890, that they have to start worrying about waste management. So it's just an interesting piece to that puzzle, because if they would have had to start dealing with waste management before these photos were taken, then this whole concept of empty cities, staged cities, you could have ruled this out. But this theory is still on the table for me. I think we did get reintroduced to these cities. And I know there's early pictures of London as well from like the early 1850s. So by the late 1850s in London, as more people, massive amounts of people are flooding the city, all of a sudden waste is an issue. So I just wanted to point that out. And so the next question is, well, why didn't the previous civilization have to worry about sanitation or waste management? And I honestly don't know. But looking at this St. Mark's Basilica, we probably didn't build this either. It was built by this other civilization. But if you look at these aerials, you could probably visualize how this building could be used for energy, transmission and receiving, right? I think that in these large antennas here with the orbs at the end, I think we can kind of visualize how these were used to transmit energy, atmospheric energy. And Age of Disclosure did a great video on this, talking about churches, mosques. They probably weren't places of worship. They were probably machines. And I'll try to leave a link to that video as well. But so we can figure out that these were probably receiving and transmitting atmospheric energy. But what we still are unclear about is the pipe organs. In all these churches, there are these, well, in a lot of churches, you find these pipe organs. And if I had to guess why were people not having to deal with waste management, I think one of the first places I would look into is this pipe organ, because they were probably doing something to the atmosphere, producing sound and frequencies that were having an effect on the human body. That's speculation on my part. Just to summarize, you have these cities that we probably didn't build, and we just repopulated them, and they weren't designed with waste management in mind, and we had to come along and create solutions for that. So the big question is, why weren't these cities and these palaces, Versailles, St. Petersburg, London, why weren't they equipped with waste management solutions? We don't know. But it's not an accident, and I've seen enough now to just be of the firm belief that it was by design, that they didn't factor it in because they didn't need to. Now, what's the reason for that? I don't know, but I just wanted to bring this to you guys, and we can go from here. I know wherever that is, but I guess I'll leave it here and just say thanks for watching, and have a nice day. Take care.
Right, so that was a thing I was listening to. That was quite interesting. Why weren't cities... maybe they ate the poo-poo. Maybe it was built by lizard people who only ate once every 6 months, no poo-poo. Maybe it was. Thing is, we don't know. We weren't there. We can't say. Why did I put that there? No. This game is not very straightforward. If you've been watching me for the past half hour, you've been seeing I've just been trying to get to grips with how does this all work then, because I don't know. Yeah. I need structural blocks, don't I? Nope, that conflicts. So, yeah. A bit confusing, considering there was loads and loads of messages in the previous mission saying, oh, do this, do that, do this, do that. And this one, it's just, yeah, here's a sea, loads of stuff's happening, have fun. No, that's not right. I think Great Pyramids built as a power station by lizard people who could levitate blocks. I don't know so much about lizard people if they're doing this stuff, but clearly something was going on in our history not too long ago. and it's not what they say. It's so now, and then if I build a bridge, and that works. Well, I'm thinking, why am I getting him to do it when I could do a conveyor belt? Yes. Won't let me do it there. So what if I do another one the other side? Let's put one there. There are lizard cities under the sea. There's certainly something underneath the oceans. We don't know about it. And I think that's why space is a distraction, because they're like, oh yeah, we've got to explore space. What about the space beneath us? No, let's not explore that. Alright, get out of the way then. So what's going? I think I need more workers. Right, there we go. You go and pick cotton in the field. So the output is book, but nothing's being picked up. So I need a grabber. Grabber. And there's an exclamation mark. Item filters. I want you to pick up book. There we go. There goes book. Books, 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 books. And then a wood conveyor belt. There we go. Right, so now the school is being supplied with paper and books. Oh, what a lot of spaghetti that is. But hey ho, it's doing the job, and that's the important thing. Now, what if there was like, there is a way to automate this? I'm going to make it better. There we go. Hey, I'm figuring this out now. This is making sense. Right, so there's the lumber mill, and it's being supplied with logs rolling down a chute, and paper's coming out. I like how you get workers at this, and the workers, they can do logistics, but they're not as good as automated logistics. In fact, I'm going to put another chute there. And then let's have another worker. Duh, of course it's not going to work because... Oh, what's that? You've tried to modify the system? Well, fuck you, I'm going to break now. Alright. Don't try and be too clever is what it's telling me. So it wants me to start producing cloth conveyor belts. Well, there's the only place with cotton. So I think I need an additional workshop. Ah, that output storage is full. So what if I tell another recipe? No, cloth conveyor belt is still locked into research. Right. Cloth conveyor belt. Intermediate logistics. Logistic blocks are placed on top of belts, chutes and blood. Great. So now I can unlock cloth conveyor belt. Not enough resources. Need red coins. I'm just going to be right back and see if the hot water's hot yet. Right, well this has been intellectually stimulating, but I am going to go and have a shower. So thanks for watching. I'll do some day